Доброго дня, шановні колеги.
Good afternoon, dear friends. Welcome to our briefing. Welcome to those who watch us here in the newsroom and online. And currently we have a briefing dedicated to the topic Dialogues about the War. We have Mr. Oleksandr Zinchenko and Ms. Katrin Eigendorf.
Of conversations and interviews with intellectuals in Ukraine and abroad for those out there who are keen to learn more, think deeper, and hear from the original sources. І ми знову з вами із 29-м випуском нашої серії розмов та інтерв'ю з інтелектуалами в Україні та за кордону для тих, хто хоче дізнатися більше, думати глибше та чути із перших джерел. This is a project of PEN Ukraine, whose team is continuing their work under the extremely difficult conditions of Russia's continuing war against Ukraine. There are no words enough to express our admiration for your dedication and commitment. Це проєкт PEN Україна, вся команда якого продовжує свою роботу в надзвичайно складних умовах триваючої війни Росії проти України. Бракує слів, аби висловити наше захоплення вашою відданістю та наполегливістю. The project is co-hosted by PEN International, which has continued to provide a platform for freedom of expression for those currently under the highest risk. Today, special thanks goes to Ukraine Crisis Media Center, which hosts our event physically and appeared to be a great partner for the episode. The project is implemented with the support of the US Embassy in Ukraine, and our traditional partners are PEN America, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Local History, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, the Harman Institute at Columbia University. We will broadcast today's event to all partners' Facebook pages. Співорганізатором проєкту є міжнародний PEN, який продовжує надавати платформу для свободи вираження поглядів тим, хто перебуває у групі найвищого ризику. Сьогодні ми висловлюємо особливу подяку Українському кризовому медіа-центру, який фізично прийняв нашу розмову і виявився чудовим партнером для нинішнього епізоду. Нагадую, що проєкт втілюється за підтримки Посольства США в Україні, і нашими традиційними партнерами є PEN Америка, Український інститут Лондона, Україна Світ, Локальна історія, Український науково-дослідний інститут Гарвардського університету та Інститут Гаррімана при Колумбійському університеті. Ми транслюватимемо сьогоднішню подію на всі партнерські сторінки у Facebook. Захід, як звично, відбуватиметься англійською мовою. My name is Olga Mucha and I will introduce our today's guests. So today we are pleased Oleksandr Zinchenko, historian, publicist, journalist, co-founder and editor-in-chief of the amazing project Historical Truth, which this year passes, I believe, 12th anniversary, right? In past, he is also deputy director of the Institute of the National Memory of Ukraine. Currently works for Suspilne TV. But probably one of the most amazing things about him that he is the author of the first book presenting the Ukrainian vision of the Katyn crime, Third Hour. Without that would be an interesting topic for the other conversation. Let's leave it for better times. He's the author of the script of the documentary cycle Collapse, How Ukrainians Destroyed the Evil Empire. The great project, and if you haven't seen it yet, this is a must. I remember how you said in one of your interviews about this documentary that Ukrainians' independence was not part of the US plan back in 1991. And I believe nowadays Ukrainians also kind of broken plans and expectations. What do you think? And Oleksandr will speak today to Katrin Eigendorf, German journalist and expert in discrimination and resisting violence. She has been working for ZDF, one of the biggest German TV companies, since 1999, initially as a reporter specialized in foreign policy. And she was also a correspondent in Moscow studio and report, among other things, on Ukraine. Since 2018, Katrin has been in the reporter pool focusing, reporting on Afghanistan, Ukraine, Russia, Lebanon, Iraq, and Turkey. So deep knowledge on the ground. In 2021, she reported from Afghanistan on the return of the Taliban, and she's been reporting from Ukraine on the war events since the end of February. Last year, Katrin has been awarded the Hans-Joachim Friedrich Prize for Television Journalism for her reporting from crisis regions of Afghanistan, Ukraine, and elsewhere. And the Media magazine honored her as Journalist of the Year. And this year, there was a grand prize for special journalist achievement. But the most important we should mention here is her recent book, The Putin's War: How People in Ukraine are Fighting for Our Freedom. I think that's a great question to start with. Dear Katrin, dear Oleksandr, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Мені теж страшенно приємно, і я дякую всім, хто нас
I also would like to thank you. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for a very good presentation. Katrin, maybe if you permit, I will ask the first question. We have been acquaintances for a long period of time. Recently, you wrote a book, The War, Putin's War, and how people in Ukraine fight for our freedom. Do you have an answer? Do you know the answer why Putin dared to start this war?
Oh, that's a difficult question. Normally Germans ask me that question. You as a Ukrainian? Okay, I try to answer. From my perspective, the war is not only on Ukraine and the existence of Ukraine. It has a much broader context. That's what I try also to explain to Germans, how much it concerns our way of life, our system, like democracy, freedom, human rights, the whole establishment of after Second World War freedom order that we have established is attacked by Russia. And this attack to Ukraine is in fact an attack to the Western world. And why Ukraine? Because Ukraine was the country that took the strongest and most effective steps for orientation to Western community by trying to join European Union, by trying to join NATO. This effort was made by other countries, for example, Georgia, but not with that effective backing by the population that we have seen on Maidan in 2014. And in effect, I'm following this war not only since February this year, but since 2014. That's when the war started. So what we see now, what Putin tries to challenge the West. What is the background? I think this is also an important point on which I wrote in my book. It's not about Russia. It's not about Russia's border or about Russia's existence. It's about the existence of a regime, of Putin's regime. Putin has changed this country to a totalitarian state that only serves the interests of a very small elite, so to say, that takes from Russia what it has, all its natural resources without building anything. That's what we have seen in the recent 22 years, and that's what Putin is fighting for. So that's my approach to this war.
Я насправді
Actually, I asked my question to you, trying to check my perspective, whether my perspective is right. My vision was that at the beginning of the so-called special operation, Putin had a wrong perception or wrong vision of the world. And in my opinion, how I see it, several weeks before beginning of the aggression, my father was have heard rather tough diagnosis. He was diagnosed with cancer. This was several weeks before the war. He stayed in Kharkiv, and we had been thinking what would happen with this threat of terrible diagnosis and Russian aggression. And during the family meeting, when we had discussions about the future, my family asked me what I thought, whether the war was going to outbreak. And I recollected one of Polish historians who wrote about German aggression back in 1939. And Slinevich, this historian, he collected that huge amounts of resources were transported and moved in many directions. So that was on the one hand. On the other hand, seeing that 200,000 of soldiers around Ukraine, nevertheless, I was surprised whether it was possible to conquer Ukraine with only 200,000 of soldiers, because Ukraine is more than 600,000 square kilometers big, and this is like only 3 soldiers per 1 square kilometer, so to say, roughly. On the other hand, I made guesses how it was possible to start invasion in late winter. I thought that they could march only in columns, that is, only highways were available for them. And in my opinion, it meant that it won't be possible to use the Afghanistan strategy. In Afghanistan, the experience was, the fighting strategy was as follows. You had to shoot the first car or the first vehicle in a column, the last vehicle in a column, and then stop it and blast, and that's it. That's why when my family asked me a question back in January whether I thought the threat of war was real, I expressed my doubts that there was possible as of January. But eventually it happened. The thing which was impossible, looked impossible for me, it happened because for a person like Putin, who based his calculations or considerations on fault assumptions, but actually, for me, who based my assumptions on the historic experience and some more reasonable assumptions, as I thought, it was a mistake. My sister eventually said that in terms of the risks assessment, the probability was high, and let us start preparations. And we started the preparations. But up to the very end, I thought that
Колонку, яку я так і не закінчив.
Putin was mistaken. And at that time, I started to read a column which was called A War or a Special Operation. And the first sentence was that Putin knows much better the special operations than the war. And my assumption was that Putin would lose this war.
Assumption. That's also what I tell Germans. When I saw Putin starting this war, my first thought was, this is Putin's end. Just the question is, when will this end come? And that's the clue question, I think. Because what we see now, after half a year of war, 6 months, Ukraine is at war, and we don't look now at the positive sides. Yeah, let's take a look at the negative sides. We have so many people dying. We have the economy ruined. We have a harsh winter where the question is, how will Ukrainian population survive that winter? We have a situation like in Zaporozhye now, which is really dangerous. So let me ask you this. I'm back the first day after a while. How is the situation? Did anything change in the mood of the population, in your special mood when you see where Ukraine is right now?
Мені видається,
It seems to me that if I look back at the beginning, if I look back at the first day, and when I recollect that days, my father died on February 22. On the 23rd, we buried him, and on February 24th, we were awakened with the sound of blasts. And there's threshold of pain, threshold of personal situation was so high that when I heard the sound of blasts, my first thought was, what an idiot. And since that time, my this first thought has not changed. This first attitude has not changed. As for Ukrainian society in general, it seems to me that a bigger part of Ukrainian society till now is in this situation of high mobilization. It feels this huge anger against this person, and this brings people together and strengthens mobilization. That is, I do not see any panic, any despair caused by huge losses. I understand that many people are in grief. Many people are in despair because they lost their homes. But when I meet with my friends, I see that there is no the mood of defeat. No.
Military experts, but experts on truth, right? So what I would like to know, because this is a big discussion in Germany and in other countries, I think, as well, what is the truth? What's going on here? We see, like recently, Russia telling the world, Ukrainians are attacking Zaporozhye and we have to protect it. One of many narratives that pop up in this war. And do you think that Ukraine is able to explain to the West what's going on here? Are you able to fight this disinformation campaign, and how do you see you can do that?
мені здається,
In my opinion, that we can counteract disinformation not with words but with actions. Quite often we hear from Putin and in the comments on Facebook, when people discuss the news in global media, I see the same narratives. For example, once I thanked to one of the global leaders for his kind words about Ukraine, but other people started to write to me, there are a lot of Nazis in Ukraine, which reflected this key narrative from Putin when he excuses his aggression against Ukraine. When I see such things, such stupid things, I feel myself lost to some extent, because I do not think there is any use to explain that you are not a camel, for example, because it's obvious that I have different eyes, I have different posture, I am not an animal, etc. It's obvious. But on the other hand, you need to appeal to some sort of rationality in those people. For example, I can say, look, in Ukraine, the level of support to right and ultra-right parties is much lesser than in France, in Germany, and in Ukraine, you almost cannot find the parties which could be compared, at least in the parliament, which could be compared either to IDF or to Marine Le Pen party. If Putin says that there are a lot of Nazis here, you even do not know what to say, because you cannot find Nazis here. In Ukraine, when Zelensky was elected the president, I think this was the only state in the world, except Israel, where there were two Jews, or better to say, people of Jewish origin, who were in power, both the president and the prime minister. And Zelensky was not elected as a Jew. Nobody saw that he was a Jew. People were thinking about his political program or looking at him. Nobody thought about Nazism at that moment. And the fact that Ukraine has neither racist nor Nazi rhetoric, and it was absent at the moment when the president was elected. I think this is the obvious proof. By the way, we had many prime ministers of Jewish origin in our Ukrainian history. We had a prime minister who ethnically was of Buryat origin. And actually, we had, I think, representatives of all the nationalities, or many nationalities, in power. And this brings me to this difficulty to explain why I am not a camel. And now my question, Katrin, to you. What's going on in German society? How do Germans assess the situation in Ukraine today? During presentation of your book, you mentioned that the war is going to change all of us and that it has changed you personally. Could you please explain what has changed in you due to this war?
I've been a reporter since nearly 30 years, and I've covered many wars. Normally, when you go to a war as a reporter, it affects you because you see sad stories, horrible situations, but in the end, you go home. And most of wars don't really affect the inner situation of your country. Even Afghanistan, where 59 soldiers, German soldiers, died, didn't really affect it apart from this tragical loss of soldiers. So it wasn't a big discussion on is it worse, what contribution we have to make. Now, with Ukraine, we have a situation where German politics changed fundamentally. Germans' attitude to Russia, which was always the effort to try to get along with Russia through diplomatic ties, through economic ties, because of the historical role also Germany sees itself in as the perpetrator, as the main source of the Second World War. This politic changed, so the radical decision and the quick decision to put sanctions in place, to stop all economic ties as it was possible. I mean, we couldn't stop them immediately, but we stopped, for example, Nord Stream 2, which was a big step. The sanctions, this military support. For Germany, this is a big step, because you have to see, like, the tradition of German country was not to support other countries with weapons, and especially a country fighting against Russia. So here we see a fundamental change in German society, because this politics is supported by the majority of the German people. And I think, as far as I see it, the majority of Germans support Ukraine, and they see quite clear what's happening here and what the war is about. But now we are in a situation where prices for this war are getting up. We have this discussion that German economy will be affected severely. And now the question comes up, are we paying a higher price than Russia? Because we see the sanctions that we implemented, they don't have the quick result that we expected them to have. The same situation if we see what's going on the ground. We expected the war to end quicker, and what we see now is that this war will not end like in a few weeks, and that there will be a hard time to support Ukraine, also military-wise. And we see the enormous threat, as I mentioned, with nuclear power plants that Russia is occupying and using as a sort of threat, I think also to threaten Europe. So I think the discussion is now getting much more severe on how we will proceed on the long run supporting Ukraine and what will be really effective. And therefore we really need information, first-hand information. That's why I'm also coming back to Ukraine to report, and I think it's very important to show what's going on in this country.
Я би хотів.
I would like to specify one thing. From Ukrainian point of view, the actions of of German authorities, of people in power in Germany, are always quite understandable. Although I realize that for Germany, this military aid and also other sorts of supplies are extraordinary, but people in Ukraine see how Chancellor Scholz rejected to provide Ukraine with tanks, for example. Could you try to explain why Chancellor Scholz rejected to supply tanks? I understand that it is not simple, but
Journalist. I'm not the speaker of the German government, and I'm criticizing government's politics when it comes to this point as well. But I will make an effort and try to make it understandable. You have to see Germany in its historical context, And you have also to be aware of the fact that when Germany was defining its politics, its after-war politics, after Second World War politics, towards the East, it was always having Russia in mind, Russian victims. It was never having Ukraine in mind. Ukraine was not a country, it was like a side effect of this big empire. And we only now started to see in what situation Ukraine was. Having said that, the fact to support a country with military facilities, with weapons, is a big step for Germany. And Germany is a very bureaucratic country, so it took a while to make the political decision, and after taking that political decision, to implement this decision. Another matter of fact is that our own military is in quite a bad shape, because we didn't invest much, we felt safe. So the fact that the world changed and that war is now taking place in Europe, in the heart of Europe, was not an option for Germany. And to stick to that reality and to see the reality that diplomacy came to an end, to a certain extent, for the moment being, was quite hard for Germany and also for German government. So what we see now is that it's more or less the Green Party, with Annalena Baerbock as our foreign minister and Habeck as our vice chancellor, a party whose core issue was to be anti-military, anti-nuclear energy, that they push much more for supporting Ukraine than the Social Democrats. And I think it's also a personal question, which I really see as a very bad step from the German side, that Schulz didn't take the chance to show up in Ukraine. I asked myself when I saw the first foreign politicians showing up in Bucha, why is the German chancellor not here? He should be here. So I'm asking myself this question as well, and I think that was not a good decision, because we have a certain responsibility towards Ukraine, according to what happened in history, but also according to what happened in the last years, because Germany was supporting Russia to a too big extent, and German politicians didn't listen and didn't really see what was happening here, that the war started already in 2014. So having said that, I hope I could have explained it, whereas I'm not really supporting this position of the government.
Я теж намагаюся.
I also tried to explain to myself that stance of Mr. Scholz. You visited Bucha, and you mentioned that Scholz did not see Bucha, but you visited it. What did you felt when you were there? And please describe the circumstances, the context, and your emotions at the moment you visited Bucha.
Yeah, we went with our ZDF team just the day after it was announced what happened in Bucha. And this trip was organized by the Ministry of Inner Affairs, which was convenient for us, so to say, because they organized transports, and in the end we had the opportunity to meet with your president, with Zelensky in Bucha. How to describe that feeling? I was really shocked. I've seen a lot of situations, I've seen a lot of wars, but what happened in Bucha really came to my heart, because you could see all the extent of destruction, all the cruelty, all the nightmare that civilians faced on one street. So in a very little frame. And to see this, and we've seen also people that were killed, that were tortured. Like the minister, ministry, inner ministry, people showed us around. And I've seen pictures that I was not able to show to my audience, so cruel and so brutal were they. But I think who saw Bucha, and it's not only the picture, it's also the smell, it's the little details to see. After having seen Bucha, also Irpin, Borodyanka, I understood quite well what this war is about. On the one hand, that it's a war against Ukrainian civilization, against not an army, but against normal people. And I've seen the extent and the way the Russian army is operating. And this was so shocking for me. It remembered me to the war in Chechnya, where same things happened. Yeah, like people were raped in the streets, people were killed, people were taken away. And Bucha changed my attitude to this war. I understood quite well what it is about.
Ти для себе
Was you able to explain to yourself this degree of cruelty of Russian soldiers? Why they were so cruel? Do you have any explanations? Why they are so cruel to civil population, which is absolutely no threat to them, and they did not provoke them?
To admit that this is a strategy, because no Russian soldier to that extent could act like this without support of his commanders. So behaving like this is a strategy. And I've worked in Russia in the 90s and have seen the Russian army acting in Chechnya. I've seen what the Russian army is like, how they behave to their own people. So there is a principle, you probably know, that what is called dedovchina, which means like the reign of the eldest, which means that young people who join the army, they're under the complete control of their commanders for a certain extent of time. And you have people dying because they're treated so badly. You have torture in the army. And the whole principle that you see in this army, and not only in the army, but also in parts of the society, is very unhuman. Russia had a very short time frame to liberate itself from its cruel history. That was in the 90s. That started in 91 and it ended when Putin came to power. That was the time when you saw like little steps from civil society coming up, little steps towards an open society. But Putin put all that down. And we have to see this tradition in which Russia and Russian population grew up. This is over generations. And that's one of the reasons why I think Russian army is acting like this. There is no respect, there is no human attitude in that army.
мені здається, оскільки
it seems to me, in a result of my experience of communication with the Russian occupants, I stayed in one of the suburbs of Kiev, near Kiev, which was reached by the Russian soldiers, and I observed them. It seems to me that there was one more motive, which I believe happened in Ukraine 100 years ago. For example, when they arrived to Ukraine, they were told that Ukrainians were extremely poor. But when they eventually arrived and when they entered our cottage town, which is purely middle-class town, so to say, it's not luxury, it's of moderate wealth. But I have heard the question, are you millionaires that you are living here? I was so much shocked that I started to explain why we are millionaires. My mom had sold her apartment in the city and relocated here. My neighbors, they are painters. Another neighbors are lawyers. All the neighborhood is the middle-class neighborhood. Also, among my neighbors, I had the former ambassador of Ukraine. For example, Ambassador Bessmertny. Now he's professor, and he heard the question on the basis of what you dare to live in these good conditions. He was also shocked with the surprise. He was unable to understand why he was living so good. What was so good about that lifestyle? And they explained, you have many stone buildings. How many villages like that do you have? And Ambassador Besmertny explained, we have 36,000 of such villages, cottage villages. And they were astonished. And I believe that this story partially explains the murders in Bucha, Irpin, Borodyanka. Killing people. They tried to overcome that experience of cruel poverty. They tried to revenge to those people for their lifestyle. That people had a lifestyle which was better than the own lifestyle of the Russian soldiers. I think this is the explanation of the Russian cruelty, the cruelty of Russian army in all those villages.
But what is the perspective now?
Якщо, я не знаю просто, наскільки я правильно тебе розумію, якщо йдеться...
I'm not sure which perspective do you mean in your question. From the perspective for the war process in general, or the future of this war, I'm not a military expert. I do not have a deep understanding of what's going on at the front line. And I can only retranslate what I hear from military experts, that we are in the middle of our way to a victory.
The military situation, I would like to know it from your perspective. We've seen the war in 2014 and have seen people in Kiev having a nice life, and they didn't really care what was going on. That was a war that was going on far away. Now I think the war is in the mid of society. So for you as an Ukrainian intellectual, for you and your friends, what is your perspective? How do you see your life, let's say, in the next 6 months?
Ну, я та своє життя бачу в роботі.
For me, it's quite easy. My life will be full of work. I work for the Ukrainian broadcasting company, and this is public media, and I am preparing new releases of for the new documentary. This will be a big documentary about Ukrainian history. I understand that there will be difficulties, but I will continue my work there. As for Ukrainian society in general, and what are the expectations of Ukrainian society for the next 6 months, I think this will be very difficult 6 months, especially when we will approach to February 24th. We expect this winter to be very difficult, and I may expect that there might be people who will start to sink into the pessimism or depression. And we should somehow explain to people that you should not stop or go pessimistic before gaining a victory. On the other hand, the war is not proper time to look in much detail at your previous faults, mistakes, historical mistakes, etc. And this is maybe the worst time to rethink your previous mistakes, although there were mistakes at the top level, at the country leadership level, and there were mistakes in the circles of Ukrainian intellectuals. Looking back, some years ago, we all understood that there were high risks for Ukraine, that escalation was very probable at that time. We tried to warn Ukrainian society, and what we heard at that time, okay, you're predicting bad things and you're threatening to us with Putin attack? And eventually that happened. The previous people in power, like President Poroshenko, they kept saying that the danger of war was persistent, but there was part in society which suggested, which challenged that attitude, and which said that you should stop shooting and the war would be stopped. But in my opinion, the war could be ended only by a person who initiated the war. And this person should either stop voluntarily or should be stopped by force. Unfortunately, this point of view in Ukrainian society did not prevail at that time. We tried to warn the country, but we were not heard. And I feel this bitterness even today, although much time had passed since that moment when we tried to awaken society. Unfortunately, this war, to some extent, is a punishment. for those Ukrainians who stayed relaxed, who did not take our warnings seriously. And now you cannot condemn that people because they are punished with the course of life, so to say. It seems to me this will be the biggest factor which will influence development of Ukrainian society after our victory, after the moment when we gain a victory. Because it is not so easy to recognize your mistakes, while the mistakes were quite serious.
Fear when you see the situation right now.
На потім чи коли
Do you mean my fear for the future, or do you mean my fear in the past?
So let's say in the future, yeah.
я себе от
I've caught myself on a thought that I have no fear. It was several months ago. It may sound surprising, but I'll try to explain. It seems to me that the situation is gradually moving towards Ukrainian victory in this war. At this moment in time, we can clearly see this victory. This is quite clear for those even who understand nothing in military business. But my absence of fear is also grounded on my own experience. We found ourselves in the midst of combat in Snegurivka, and the closest blast was some 50, 70 meters from our house, when one of the mines targeted ground. And the sound of that blast was very loud. At the same time, at that moment, I understood that there were no adrenaline in my blood. I was unable to eat, I was unable to sleep, but during that very heavy shelling, my mom and we managed to hide ourselves, not even in a bunker, but between two walls inside our house. But at that very moment of very intensive shelling, I understood that I was feeling nothing. I had neither emotions nor thoughts. It was like a Zen situation for me. Perhaps you would agree that it is strange to feel this Zen situation under shelling in the moment of biggest danger. And at that very moment, I realized that I had no fear. And not only in that moment, nor for the future. Now I have no fear about Ukrainian future. Do you have any idea what will be the end, what will be the final situation of this war?
The final situation, as to every war, will be that people, that the enemies will sit down on a table and make peace. For me, the crucial question is how long will that take and how many victims we will have on that way to the table. the war will only change if Putin sees that he has much more to lose than to gain. And that I think he also needs to lose his resources to continue the war. Also, as we see now, this will take a lot of time. Sanctions are not as effective as we thought. So my perspective for the future is, in a good case scenario, sooner or later Russians will decide on their own future, and this country hopefully will change to a better country, a country without Putin in power, and will live in peace with his neighbors and will allow smaller countries around them to choose their own way of integration to whatever organization they want. But this might be a long way in front of us.
Thank you so much.
Нам нагадують, що
We are reminded that we are running out of time. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank
Nice meeting
you.
you.
Thank you so much for this important, very realistic and sober conversation on the reality, and also recollection of those days of where war started, but as well the extended history of Ukrainian-German relationship. This conversation was a try to find out not only where is Ukraine right now, but also where is Germany. And German politics and attitude changed significantly despite the historical role. The decision to apply sanctions was seen quite radical, and for Germany is a big step, as Katrin said, right? Some fundamental changes in German society where the majority of Germans today support Ukraine. That Ukraine, which while ago had no clear identity or own subjectivity in eyes of most of Germans, I should remind you. But then the question appears, are we paying the higher price than Russia? And here we coming to the one of many narratives of this war. Where is the truth? For Katrin, Bucha was the momentum, right? That was an experience which changed the perception of this war. What could create the momentum for others? Here is a question to respond, probably with Oleksandr's documentaries as well, right? The main objective of our conversations is raising awareness. We can make it different ways to counteract the disinformation, to keep imposing sanctions, even if seemingly they didn't give an immediate result. Support of Ukraine costs. And this is a choice each of us should take sooner or later. But I will remind the statement Katrin gave at the very beginning of this conversation. This war is Putin's end, and the only question is when. Don't underestimate your own role. We're grateful to our brilliant guest. That was very interesting conversation with a lot of insights. We are grateful to all our partners for their precious support. Today's special thanks go to Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And I also want to remind you that the project is implemented with the support of the US Embassy in Ukraine and our traditional partners, Pan America, the Ukrainian Institute, the Ukrainian Institute London, Ukraine World, Local History, Harvard Ukrainian Research Institute, and the Harman Institute at Columbia University. The gratitude, of course, to PEN Ukraine, which continues to stand at the front lines in the name of freedom and truth. PEN International is proud to be a platform that supports freedom of expression. We hope those dialogues give you enough insights and material for deep thinking. The next episode will be held in a week, next Tuesday on 3rd of September at 6 p.m. Kyiv time, 4 p.m. London time. We'll be hosting two journalists, Paweł Pieniążek, Polish journalist, has reported on refugee crisis wars in Ukraine, Iraq, and Syria, and Olena Husseinova, poet, journalist, and author and radio host on Ukrainian radio station Culture. Follow our dialogues of war, spread the word, and stand with Ukraine, quoting both of our guests today. This is our shared responsibility today. Thank you.
Дякую.
Дякую вам. Перепрошую, що мусила втрутитись через таймлайн. Це завжди найважче знайти цей момент.